Welcome to Beyond the Basics, a deeper study of God's Word. So good to see those of you who are here. It's good to know we have several that are joining us on our online ministry. So thank you, and we trust you find Bible study challenging and enriching. So I'm going to ask, if you don't mind, turn to the book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes chapter 10. Ecclesiastes chapter 10. We are studying through this incredible book of wisdom. And the book of Ecclesiastes seeks to discover what matters most in life. What's the meaning of life? What's the significance of life? So it's a combination of wisdom and a bit of philosophy. And Solomon, the great wise king of Israel, embarked upon a journey, a spiritual, intellectual pursuit to understand what purpose life entails. Now, Solomon used wisdom, of course, in his journey of discovery. Being the wise man that he was, and I say that in the very best sense of the word, of course, he obviously used his giftedness in wisdom to pursue the purpose of life. And this evening in our text, we will see that he uses several proverbs to contrast wise living with foolish wisdom. With foolish living. Now let me just kind of give a little word about where we are. There are 12 chapters in this book. We are on chapter 10, and if the Lord wills, we'll make our way into chapter 11. So most likely we'll have 2 additional lessons, and we'll finish up this book. And so if you've been studying with us, praise the Lord. If you're just joining in tonight, you're going to receive some very good enrichment, I trust, this evening. But he's been very committed to this search. And tonight it's a little bit different. It's almost like he hits a pause button of sorts, because he's been wrestling with wisdom. How does wisdom lead a person to find meaning? And if man is left to his wisdom in pursuing significance in life, how can he do so when God controls all that comes about? So it's almost like he's run the course a little bit on wisdom. He's not made conclusions yet. We'll talk about that yet in the next 2 weeks. But it's almost like in the end of chapter 10, the beginning of verse 11, he hits the pause button a little bit, and he gives us some wisdom. It's like he's stopping and saying, I'm going to give you some wisdom here. Wisdom will not lead you to understand the significance of life, the importance of life. It just won't do it. He's tried. He's already reached a conclusion. It just leaves you in a shortfall. However, there's advantages to being wise and using wisdom. So that's our study tonight. We're going to look at some very useful components of and applications of wisdom in our lives, and he does so through the use of several proverbs. Now, as you know, Solomon, the great king, also wrote most of the proverbs. Didn't write all of them, but most of them. And so it shouldn't surprise us that he throws in some proverbs from time to time, even in this book. So let's jump in and begin with verses 12 through 15. A fool uses a lot of words. A fool uses a lot of words. Chapter 10, verse 12. Words from the mouth of a wise man are gracious, while the lips of a fool consume him. Now, what he's doing here, he's comparing the words of a wise person and a person who's a fool. Now, if I was to pause and say, okay, which are you? Would you describe yourself as a wise person or as a fool? Now, most of us would do what? What would we say? We're kind of in the middle. There's a little bit of wisdom in my life, but yet, I don't have all the wisdom that I wish that I did have, so I guess the pendulum swings a little bit to the full meter. But he's making a contrast. It's almost like he's kind of forcing us to choose. He wants us to see the difference, because there is value in wisdom. Now, what he says here is a wise man's words are like grace. Now think of grace here as God's favor. If you really want favored, if you want to live with a sense of, you know what, I'm blessed, as we say today, right? Yeah, I'm blessed. I live a blessed life. Well, that's kind of grace. And so a wise person's words will lead them to grace. However, a fool's words are self-destructive. Look what it said again in verse 12. How does he express it? A fool consumes him. He's consumed. His own words consume him. They diminish him. They weaken him. They lessen him. Now, once again, a fool uses a lot of words. And boy, it doesn't do him any favors. But a wise person experiences the grace of the Lord. Now let's look at verses 13 through 15. The beginning of his talk is folly. So in other words, now what he's doing here, instead of talking about wisdom, he wants to talk a little bit more about fools. Okay? So here he goes. He speaks about a fool. Now, the beginning of his talking is folly. No, he starts out the day talking folly, foolishness, we would say. I mean, he starts out that way. I mean, he gets out of bed talking foolishness. And the end of it is wicked madness. He begins the day, he ends the day, speaking with a lot of words that is nothing but foolishness. And look how he describes it. It's wicked madness. Wicked madness. Well, what an expression, right? Wicked madness. I mean, it just completely destroys the person. All right? Now, going to verse 14. Yet the fool multiplies words. Does he give up? I mean, he starts out using a lot of words, doesn't get him anywhere. He ends the day using a lot of words, doesn't get him anywhere. And what? He didn't give up. Guess what? Next day does the same thing. He continues multiplying words. No man knows what will happen, and who can tell him what will come after him? I mean, he does the same thing, even though he doesn't know what's going to come about. He doesn't know what's going to occur. He doesn't know the future. So what does the fool do? He keeps using many words. It doesn't matter. He may not know what's going to happen, but he's got an opinion about it. And he's got an opinion about what you ought to do with your life. That's what a fool does. And he also says, and he doesn't know what will come after him. A fool doesn't know what happens with life after death. But it doesn't bother the fool. He just keeps on ratcheting, talking, expressing himself, always just multiplying his words, okay? And I like the phrase here, well, listen, we didn't go to verse 15. Let's do that. The toil of a fool so wearies him that he does not even know how to go to a city. Looking at the first part of that. The toil of a fool so wearies him. He lives heavy. I mean, his words, his life, his work, everything that he does, it's a chore to him. Because as many words provides no solution. It provides no relief. It doesn't help him. I mean, it destroys him, so it doesn't help him. But then look, I like how he ends at verse 15. He doesn't even know how to go to a city. He can't even get to town. He's so full, he can't even give you the directions to get to town. Reminds me of a terrible dream I had. And, well, it wasn't all that terrible, actually. It wasn't frightening or anything. It was happened just last night. I dreamed I was on a motorcycle. I don't ride motorcycles. I just don't do it. You know, I want four wheels or forget it. Just stay away from me, you know. But I was on a motorcycle riding through Anchorage, making my way all the way, you know, through Alaska. And I knew I had an hour and a half to do it. And I thought I could do this hour and a half. So hour and a half there, hour and a half back. And I had this huge book of McNally's road maps, you know, right there in my lap. And I'm there in Anchorage. I'm trying to figure out the best route to take. And I know it's just stupid. And so, you know, say, well, a fool. He has many words. He can't even tell you how to get to town. In an agricultural rural environment, I mean, that's kind of shallow. That's really, really shallow. So what Solomon is doing is he's obviously minimizing foolishness. which is characterized by a lot of words, okay? Now, the message here is quite clear. A lot of words do not make a person wise. Now, sometimes we think, well, a real wise person, boy, they always have an opinion about everything. And boy, they can just talk forever. You want to talk politics? They'll talk politics. You want to talk about science? They'll talk about science. You want to talk about philosophy? Boy, they've certainly got a lot to say about philosophy. You just throw whatever it is on the table, and boy, they can just take off with it. Boy, that is a really wise person. I'm thinking of someone, not in our church, but I'm thinking of someone who obviously not be disclosed by name. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. This person can go on all day about it, and we tend to think of them as know-it-alls because they have an opinion about it, and they'll talk about it as though they know what they're talking about, and it's rather foolish. Now, let's just make certain that we kind of get the context here. Solomon was into wisdom. Wisdom will not carry you to where you need to be. We've been studying that now for 2 or 3 weeks. Wisdom, your wisdom. Yet God gives wisdom, but the wisdom you have will not get you where you need to be. Really, with purpose and meaning in life. But it's a whole lot better than being a fool. Now, sometimes people think they're wise. They act wise because they use a lot of words. Really, that's a mark of a foolish person. All right, now let's move on. Foolish leaders live with incompetence. Boy, he's not given up yet. By he, I mean Solomon. He's not given up yet. He's still on this notion of living like a fool. None of us want to live like a fool, so let's make sure we're listening to what he has to say. All right, verses 16 and 17. Woe to you, O land, whose king is a lad and whose princesses feast in the morning. Now, let me just kind of hit the pause button here. Solomon now is going to compare a wise leader. Here he uses the word king. Later he'll use the term princess. He speaks in the same passage about a rich person. So I think what we need to think is we wouldn't necessarily say about a president. Let's not say, well, he's just talking about the king. I think for us to really get a good feel for what he's communicating, we would say leaders, people that are in positions of influence. And I think that would help us out. Woe to you. Anytime you hear woe, it means pull back, right? Woe to you, O land, a nation, if you will, whose king, look at this, whose king is a lad. Now let me ask you, if you were to choose a kingdom and say, well, you know what, I want to be ruled well by a wise person, would you choose a kid? The word lad here can be translated child, could be translated youth, but really a child is the better concept here. Let's just call him 10 years of age. Let's just pull it out there, all right? So here you are, you're considering being led by a 10-year-old. Now let me ask you, how do you feel about things so far? Now you would say, well, wait a minute. No, that's a 10-year-old or a child in a position of leadership, because in leadership you have influence. I don't want to give myself to a child when this child has influence over my life and my welfare and my well-being. That's the point. Woe! Woe to you, O land, whose king is a lad and whose princesses feast in the morning. Now let me ask you, back in the ancient days, kings feasted a lot. In fact, a lot of times they'd feast daily, but it was always in the evening, right? What did they do in the morning? If they didn't feast in the morning, what did they do in the morning? Basically, what did they do in the morning? Yeah, they worked. Yeah, even kings had to work. They had to see to the affairs of the kingdom. They had to do stuff. Feasting was a nighttime thing. Always in the nighttime. But look what he says here. Here's this lad, this kid, who's now in a position of authority. That's the way it is with a fool. A fool who is a leader is incompetent, and he's also undisciplined. He wants to feast in the morning. He says, you know what, boy, we had a good party last night. Let's get up and do it this morning. Let's not even wait till the night. Let's do it again right now. That's foolish. All right. Undisciplined. Incompetent. Now look at verse 17. Now here's the comparison. But blessed are you, woe to you to begin with. Now blessed are you, O land, whose king is nobility. In other words, you are in a, you've got prestige. You have developed into this leader. You're competent. And whose princesses eat, where do they eat? At appropriate time for strength. They eat to get strong. They eat for nourishment, not to get drunk. That's what a fool does. But who eats and drinks for strength. You see, what Solomon is saying here, he's comparing a leader who is competent and wise and disciplined with a fool as a leader who's undisciplined, who's incompetent, and just undisciplined. Okay? Now let's go on verses 18 to 19. Through indolence, laziness, your version may read, the rafters sag, and through slackness the house leaks. You see, an incompetent leader basically lives incompetently even though the roof sags and the house leaks. Boy, we got that picture down, don't we? The roof sags and the house leaks. I mean, the spigot's just leaking, and he goes on with the party. He goes on and says, hey, where's the next feast? Let's, boy, we're going to have a good time. And the roof's sagging. You got more important. Why? Because he's undisciplined. He's incompetent. That's how a fool lives. 19. Men prepare a meal for enjoyment. Now let's stop there. Well, no, let's not. Let's go ahead and read. And wine makes life merry, and money is the answer to everything. All right, now, if you really want to live like a fool, here you go. Okay, you ready? By the way, he's talking about leaders, but this is true of anybody. Men prepare a meal for enjoyment. Now let's get a little bit personal now. In the ancient day, as is true in our day, God gave us produce. For what reason? To eat. For what reason? Nourishment. For nourishment. Sure, for nourishment. That's why when we kill an animal, we just don't hunt animals and let them die. If we kill a chicken, we eat a little rascal. That's for nourishment. It's not for sport. You know, I don't want to get off subject here, but the point of it is, here's these lazy leaders, and what they do is they prepare food for enjoyment. They just like to eat. They just like to eat. Not only do they like to eat, they like to drink because it makes them happy and merry. And here's even worse yet. They think that the answer to everything is money. What's the question? It doesn't matter. The answer is money. Money. Money is the answer to everything. Now, let's just stop for a minute. Let's talk about our culture for a moment. Do we just say, I live my life doing kind of what satisfies me, pleases me. I do what I want to do, what feels good to me. The rafters are sagging, the spigot's leaking. That doesn't bother me because I'm going to have a good time. I'm going to go to the ball game. I'm going to have a good time. And you know what? And when it comes to food, I say, well, I that's my good time. That is I just do that to pass. That's my good time thing. And I drink. I go out with my friends. I have my friends over. We cook out. We have a good time. And really, the truth is if I just had money, I think I could make it and have a good life. Or I just need a little more money. If that doesn't describe our culture, I don't know what does. And what is Solomon saying? That's how a fool lives. That's how a fool lives. If Solomon were alive today, he'd look at the United States. Oh, he'd see us wealthy. But he'd say, man, you're the biggest bunch of fools I've ever seen in my life. Okay, I think he would. And I'm one of us. I'm not any exception there too, of course. All right, where did we leave off? Okay, I think we left off. Yeah, we left off at 19. Here we go with verse 20. Here we go. Furthermore, in your bedchamber, do not curse a king. Now, the rulers, because really the context here is now really the leaders, the king and the leaders. Now, in your bed chambers. By the way, if you're a king, who sleeps in your bed? Now, let's be careful here. Don't. Who basically sleeps in your bed? You do. Thank you. You got the answer right. Needed a little help there, just to stay in the middle of the road. Basically, you did. And if you had a wife, or like Solomon, 700, they all had their own beds. Now, you may have a guest over from time to time, but the point of it, that was your bed. They were private. I'm saying all that to say they were private. Okay? Furthermore, in your bed chambers, in your privacy, when no one's around, nobody's around. Even your servants don't come in unless you invite them. In your bedroom, do not curse a king. Don't speak ill of a ruler, of a leader. Even if you're like in your own bedroom, don't even think it. And in your sleeping rooms, again, parallelism. That's a sleeping room's a bedroom, right? Yeah, of course, parallelism. And in your sleeping rooms, do not curse a rich man. Now, why would he say the same thing about a rich man as a king? Well, because rich folks were in positions of influence and power. And you're trying to make it in life. There were the haves and has-nots, especially in the ancient world, and hardly no middle class. And so the rich folks, they had great influence over your life. So do not curse a rich man. Why? Even in your sleeping room, even in the privacy. Why? Let's get to here. By the way, you've heard this before. Now you know where it originates, right here in Ecclesiastes. For a bird of the heavens, which means the air, by the way, not where God is. God doesn't send a bird down from his throne. You're talking about the air. For a bird of the heavens will carry the sound, and the winged creature will make the matter known. A little old bird is going to tell them. You talk about the king, word's going to get back to him because a little old bird's going to hear it. Yeah, but it was in my bedroom. Nobody was around. It doesn't matter. If you cursing a rich man, he has influence over your life. A fool does that. Keep your bad words, bad thoughts to yourself about others. You know when a king's foolish, you don't have to go around telling everybody the king's foolish. Did you see can you imagine what he did? Everyone knows that. Keep it to yourself. Because a bird will hear and it will get back to him. And then you're the one who gets squashed. Now, he didn't say that, but that's the obvious conclusion. Okay? All right, very good. Now, here's the message. You ready? It is to your advantage to be wise and tolerate incompetent leaders. Now, he's speaking about living a wise life. It's better to live a wise life. Wisdom will not get you where you need to be in life, but it has this advantage over foolishness. So it's to your advantage to live like a wise person, be wise, and tolerate even incompetent leaders. Now, anyone will tolerate a competent one, but an incompetent one you need to tolerate. Because you're going to get yourself in a trap. Little old bird's going to go around and you're going to find yourself in harm's way. All right? All right, very good. Now, let's move on to chapter 11. We see Solomon. kind of breaking a little bit of the main thrust, giving us some proverbs and some wisdom sayings to help us in life. Because even though wisdom will not get us where we need to be, it sure is better than living like a fool. And he really cautions us, don't live like a fool. Here we go. In chapter 11, verses 1 through 6. Chapter 11, verses 1 and 2. Cast your bread on the surface of the waters, for you will find it after many days. Now, you all have heard that your entire life. Cast your bread on the waters, right? And I have. I'm sure you have. Do we really know what it means? Well, casting your bread on the waters, you've got to see the picture. You got to give it a little bit of room. He's not talking about feeding the ducks by the pond. By the way, this has nothing to do with feeding ducks at the pond. Taking your bread would basically be like the grain. Take your grain and put it on the waters, which is what? Which is take your grain and let it go across the sea. In other words, do something, work. Take the grain. Don't just sit there. We're going to talk about that in a second. He's going to say, you just don't be idle. So you got to engage in life. Take your grain, get it on a ship, get it across the water, because you'll find, as he says here, you'll find it after many days. It's going to have reward. I mean, you're going to get something out of it. Okay? Now, verse 2. Divide your portion to 7 or even to 8. We are now having an economics course 101 called Ancient Economics. You ready? Ancient Economics. Welcome to the class. Solomon's the professor, and I'm his teaching assistant. And here's what he said. By the way, when I was in college, like 300 years ago, it seems like, and I took economics. This is funny. And it's funny to me. It's not going to be a bit funny to you. Now build it up like you're going to laugh. It'll be not a bit funny to you. But in economics, it was just like the professor. It's kind of like when you go to church, the answer's always Jesus. And in economics, at the School of Business, where I kind of earned my degree at a high university, the answer always was diversify. It doesn't matter what, diversify. And if you just said, just like if you say Jesus Church, you say diversify, you're at least headed down the right road. And if he calls on you and you're not prepared, you hadn't even studied last night, it doesn't matter, diversify. You can see how well I did in economics, can't you? But it worked most of the time. That's exactly what Solomon says. Look what he says. Look in verse 2. Divide what you have. Divide your portion to 7 or even 8. Diversify. For you do not know what misfortune may occur on earth. When disaster comes, when you diversify, you at least have something. But if you here's how we say it, right? Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Because when misfortune comes, what happens? It goes down the tube and you got nothing. But if you diversify 7, maybe even 8, he said. When disaster comes, misfortune comes, you're going to come up with something. Okay? So work hard. Be smart. Diversify. Okay. All right. Verse 3. If the clouds are full, now here let me just kind of clue us in here on what he's doing. In verses 3 and 4, he's given us some examples that we could think about as like sowing and reaping, okay? Because if you really want to make it in life, you don't want to be a fool, but you want to make it. So you got to cast your bread on the waters. In other words, you got to work. You got to get the grain out. You just can't sit there. You got to make it happen. And then diversify, okay? Now, in verse 3 and 4, he gives us some examples here. If the clouds are full, they pour out rain upon the earth. Okay, so you need water. If you're going to have crops, you need water. So when you see the clouds full, guess what? There you go. What do? You can expect water to be poured out. Common sense, basically. Just you can follow along. And whether a tree falls toward the south or toward the north, wherever the tree falls, there it is. Oh, well, wait a minute. I'm looking at the tree. I can't tell. Is it going to go this way? Is it going to go this way? Oh, no. I'm just going to sit here, and I'm going to figure this thing out. And you sit there. You don't know if it's going to go to the north or south, but when it lands, that's where it lands. And nothing you're going to do about it. The cloud is just full of water. And you can say, I wonder when it's going to rain. I don't know. I think it's going to, boy, we really need some rain. Boy, my crops would do good if it rained. And you're just sitting there talking about the weather when you had nothing to do with it. There's nothing you can do about the weather. Okay? Now, moving on, verse 4. He who watches the wind, now he tells us what he's talking about. He who watches the wind will not sow, and he who looks at the clouds will not reap. So if you want to, here's wisdom. Here's wisdom for life. I mean, Solomon just hits the pause button after giving us these great lessons about his search for meaning in life. And he said, I'm going to give you some wisdom because, you know what, I've been hard on wisdom because wisdom is not going to get you the answers you need. But I'm telling you, wisdom is better than being foolish. And so you're going to have to work, cast your bread on the sea, and diversify. And then you just can't sit idly. You just can't sit by and do nothing. If you watch the wind, you'll never sow. I don't know if it's a good time to, I don't know, maybe it's not a good, maybe we ought to do that tomorrow. You know, look at the wind. I don't know, I think it's a good time. And if you look at the clouds, you say, I'm not going to go out there because if I go out there to work, plant seeds, it's going to rain, wash them away. I think I'll just wait. You can't do that. Solomon said, don't do it. You cannot be idle. Don't wait for an opportune time. You know, opportune times rarely ever come. Have you noticed that in life? When should I have a baby? Well, we got to have all of our finances. We got to all. You know, when are we going to get married? Well, I want to get married when they got all the. Or when, you know, am I going to be able to, change something that we feel is very necessary to change? Well, we got to have all this stuff in order. Yeah, and sometimes it's good to calculate it. That's not what Solomon's saying. You just can't sit and do nothing. Okay, now let's keep going here. I think we're on verse 5, aren't we? Just as you do not know the path of the wind and how the bones are formed in the womb of the pregnant woman, so you do not know the activity of God who makes all things. We do not know the work of God because it's just like God and God alone has the path of the wind. It's like God and God alone knows how the bones of a fetus come together in a woman's womb. So you just can't sit there and say, well, I don't know. I've got to figure this out first because who knows the activity of God? He's behind all of this. Whether it rains on your work, or whether a tree falls where you don't want it to fall, whether you just got to go on. Misfortune is going to come. Diversify so you're at least prepared, but it happens. You know, we get so thrown off by negative circumstances. We start out, God doesn't care. We go right to God. God doesn't care. God doesn't love me. You know what God allowed to happen to me? I don't think, Solomon is giving us some great advice here. This is called life. We live in life, even believers, and we just got to be prepared. All right, look if you will at verse 6 here. Sow your seed in the morning and do not be idle in the evening. For you do not know whether morning or evening sowing will succeed or whether both of them alike will be good. Sow your seeds all day long. Work all day long. Work. Because you don't know which, if any or both, will succeed. Cast your seed. You got to throw the seed. You got to get out there and do something. Now, here's the message to all this. You'll say, whoa, boy, I don't know. What's all this about? Well, here's the message. It is wise to work consistently because of our inability to know what God will allow to occur. It's wise to work constantly because we just don't know what God's going to allow to do, happen or come about. So work. Don't sit there and wait on life. It'll pass you by. Now you're saying, well, boy, this is so practical. about following a competent leader versus an incompetent leader, using a lot of words or fewer words, and trying to make it in life, getting ahead in life. Boy, yeah, these are Proverbs. These are just wisdom. The Solomon, the great king, discovered in life. Now, we're going to have some application questions that I trust will make these words of Solomon helpful to us. All right? So here we go. If you're studying with us online, we want you to engage. We cannot be hearers of the word only. We must be doers. So here's what we're doing. We are now taking the text that we've just studied, and now we're going to make application to us. And we call these application questions. If you're studying with us here in the worship center, we have two microphone runners, and they are going to put the microphone right about at your chin. And so you can speak in the microphone. If you are at home, or somewhere other than here, you'll need to key in your comments or questions, and we want you to engage too. All right, so here's the very first application. Now remember, what are we trying to do here? We're trying to be wise instead of foolish. Who wants to be a fool? Okay, so here we go. What relationship do words have with wisdom? In your thought, in your belief, in your wisdom. What relationship do words have with wisdom? Words and wisdom. What's the relationship? We studied what Solomon had to say. What do you think about words and wisdom? What relationship do they have? You want to be a wise person, present yourself as wise. You want to have some influence, you want to make it, get ahead. You need to be wise, not foolish. What relationship do words have with wisdom? All right. Thank you, Faith. Get us started.
I know, I'm sorry. It's not just the words, but it's how you say the words.
Okay, all
and
right.
the way they're delivered and what they leave behind.
Sure, all right. Would everyone agree with Faith? It's not just the words that are used, but it's how they're expressed. Yeah, I think we all would agree with that. A wise person, and what Faith is saying, a wise person not only carefully chooses the right words, but how the words are expressed. The tone, right? Tone, etc. Yeah, very good. All right, good. Great. All right, Brother Terry, what relationship do words have with wisdom? You want to be wise. You don't want to live like a fool. All right, here we go.
If I understand what Solomon is saying, it's not the quantity of your words, but the quality of your words.
Oh, well. Yeah, it's not the quantity, it's the quality. How many times have we been with folks and we've noticed, like maybe in a small group Bible study or maybe even at work, someone really hardly ever says anything, but when they do, they really have something to say? Yeah, I think that's exactly what Solomon was saying, and I think that's what Terry is saying as well. You don't have to use a whole lot of words. And really, those many words don't impress most folks. It's what you say that we really need to give consideration. Some of you here today are introverted and you don't use a lot of words. You're not quick to get in a conversation. But usually when you have something to say, you've got something to say. Well, that's wise. It's wise. Because if you use a lot of words and people say, well, I throw out 3/4 of what that person says, there's about 1/4 of what that person says that has any significance at all. The rest of it is just kind of foolery. Well, guess what? When you show up at work, you show up at church, you show up at small group Bible study, people are going to expect, okay, about 3/4 of that person says doesn't mean anything because they're always talking about stuff I'm not interested in. You know? Well, it's not wise. People write you off. They'll write you off. Many of you hold back because you don't speak a lot. It's true. Many of you hold back from even serving the Lord because you say, well, I just don't know what to say. You know, other people, they just talk all the time and they know all of this. I just don't have much to say. You hold back. You very well may be a candidate for the most wise person in your group. It's true. It's the person that always ratchets and speaks and knows everything and got to be the first. Yeah, I'm saying that's not always true. Just be, don't hold back. All right, Brother Charles.
There's a saying that goes something like this. Better a fool to keep his mouth shut than to say open and remove all doubt.
Thank you, Brother Charles. I think that is a good proverb. I'm not sure who the originator of that, but that is a good proverb. Oh, it's a very, very good modern day proverb, and that is for sure. All right, very good. Anyone else? What relationship do words have with wisdom? Now, and the reason I really wanted to press this a little bit, because we really get hung up on words. We do. I'm reminded of a New Testament example. Paul wasn't a great speaker. He was an incredible theologian and writer. Good reason to believe Paul was not an eloquent speaker. But there was an eloquent speaker in the New Testament. We don't know much about him, but he was sharp, very bright, very eloquent, and someone knows who I'm talking about. Apollos, thank you. We do know about Apollos. He was very well known for his speaking ability. But you know what? Priscilla and Aquila, and really it was Priscilla, not Aquila, the woman of the two, pulled him aside and say, "You really are gifted at speaking, but you really need to know about the baptism of Jesus. You got to know before you keep on with all this teaching you're doing. You really have to know some fundamentals and essentials." So we just get hung up on, and we're impressed with people that speaks many words. One of the greatest preachers I've heard in my day and my time is a man who, last I heard, was selling funeral plots. He maybe graduated out of that. I'm not real sure. He pastored one of the flagship churches in the United States, one of the largest churches in America for a short time. It was a church in Texas. In fact, it was First Baptist Church, Dallas, Texas. Credible, influential church. And man, that guy could preach. But he was empty on the inside. He is empty on the inside. So those of you who tend to get a little bit thrown off because I'm afraid I'll say something wrong. I don't have a lot to say. I don't have a lot to contribute. I really want, at work, at church, it doesn't matter where. I'm always kind of letting everybody else just kind of go and I stand back. No, don't think you're a fool. You very well may be wise, but neither let it go by. You can't sit there. Remember what Solomon said? You can't sit there and do nothing. All right, good. Very good. Let's go to number 2. Here we go. How should you respond when you know more than your superior? How should you respond when you know more than your superior? That's what Solomon was talking about. The kings, the princes, and all that. They were incompetent. I mean, they just were incompetent. How do you respond when you know more than your supervisor, than your boss at work, or your superior, maybe even your teacher? Very good and likely it's your pastor. Okay, so that was supposed to be funny. No one laughed. And so, how should you respond when you know more than your superior? All right, Sister Virginia.
Well, I think it would depend on who your superior was. And
Okay.
some people don't appreciate what you say. It depends on what kind of person. But if they would appreciate what you would say, then you could say it. But if you thought you might get fired, you better keep quiet.
Okay, all right. Now, that sounds very practical to me, and I think that's pretty wise. Sister Virginia, and of course you heard what she had to say just as well as I did. Do you think most people who are superiors really want to hear correction from their subordinates? Most of the time? Most of the time? Even if the subordinate is right, do you think most of the time a superior wants to be corrected by the subordinate? Now you say, well, that's not very spiritual. Well, at the point, we're talking about wisdom here. This is fundamental, just common living stuff here. Wise living, okay? That's why Solomon says, Even in your bedchamber, don't even tell it. When you're alone, don't even speak it. A bird will hear, and somehow they'll figure it out. How should you respond when you know more than your superior? Sister Virginia said, well, it depends if the person will receive the words or not receive the words. All right, let's keep on. Let's kind of fetter it out a little bit more. What do you think? All right, Sister Linda. All right, Linda's coming up here. Linda. If you're studying with us online, jump right in and start keying away.
I think it depends on if they're doing something unethical. Then you have to say something.
Okay, all right. So, Linda, you're saying there are times when you run the risk. There is a risk involved. You know it. It's calculated. But there are times when the risk is worth confronting the superior. Yeah. And I think most of us would agree. I mean, that's not the day in and day out practice. But yet there are times, exceptions. Again, a Proverbs is not a rule like a law. It's just a general wise way of practicing life, doing life. Yeah, very good. All right, someone else. All right, Sister Pat.
Outside of it being something illegal or unethical, if a person is your superior, even though you may know more than them or a better way than them, you need to do it their way.
Okay.
You need to humble yourself and do it their way because they are the one in charge.
Oh, well. You know what you said, Sister Pat, reminds me of Romans 13. And this is the chapter of theology, or the book of theology, the New Testament book of Romans. And in chapter 13, Paul speaks about subordinating yourself to authorities. Who was the authority at Rome? The emperor. What kind of a dude was the emperor? Wicked, bad, godless, false teaching, and just was wicked. Many of them were, well, I won't get into all that. They had sexual deviances, which we don't need to get into, of course. But they're just wicked dudes. And Paul said, you submit yourself to authorities, when in fact he knew the authority was Rome and the emperor principally. It's wise. It's wise. Second thing, and Pat, thank you for mentioning it. One of the most fundamental characteristics of a Christian life is humility and submissiveness. Because we might say, well, yeah, but I might get walked on. They might, I know more than them, and it's fair. I'm into fair and what's right, and I'm just going to say it whether they like it or not. Well, you probably had a job, and you're not going to be catching much bread on the waters because you're pretty much going to be looking for a job all the time. At some point you got to say, okay, I'm going to be wise, and really as being a follower of Jesus, one of the most fundamental qualities is to live a humble and contrite life. We're not worried if someone overshadows us. That's not what life is about for us. Life about for us is serving. It's Jesus denying himself, taking up his cross. It's us following in that example, denying ourselves, taking up our cross and following him. All right, Sharon White, studying with us online. Sharon, it's good to have you join in. Is it something that could hurt them or others? Yeah, thank you, Sharon. That takes us back to those, if so, you need to speak up, Sharon is saying. And there are times, if it's a matter of safety, you would obviously, again, do that. As a pattern of life, however, generally the answer would be you live humbly. You submit yourself and say, okay, this may not be just, but guess what? There's no justice on the earth. I don't know how many times I had that conversation with my kids. It's not just at work. It's not fair at work. Not fair. It's not fair. It's not fair. Well, guess what? So where you want to go where there's fair? You're looking for fair? Where do you want to go? I don't know where you want to go for fair. There is no thing fair in this fallen, depraved world. Okay? Tracy Ellis, thank you, Tracy, for joining in. And this is what Tracy has to say. Humility and submission requires us to trust Christ. Thank you, Tracy. You're exactly right on point there. It's all about Christ in us. We can't do that on our own because without Christ, what do? We rely on justice, fairness again. Because that's just kind of that common value that seems to be most reasonable to humanity. What's fair across the board. But now that we have Christ, we can humble ourselves. We can humble ourselves. We can live in submission. All right, very good. Brother Andy. Thank you, Tracy.
I just wanted to use an example. My brother has a PhD in library science, and he was the assistant director for the Atlanta Public Libraries. But his superior, who was the director, was pretty much intimidated by him because he only had a master's degree. But that did not mean that my brother knew more. He just had the credentials.
And how did it work out, Brother Randy?
My brother liked him. It was his friend.
Okay.
So what my brother did, took another job.
Okay. All right.
And I was really proud of him. And
Okay.
so he took another job with an education
Yeah.
university.
Thank you for a good real life example. Yeah, it's hard for us to live when in a world that's not fair. We just, everybody ought to be treated the same. Well, yeah, that sounds nice. That's not life. That's not life. Brother Hubert, if you take the microphone to Charles, we got to understand we live in a fallen world. We have to adjust to the fallen world. Christ gives us that ability to make that adjustment. All right, Brother Charles, last comment. We're going on to our final one.
Well, oftentimes your superior depends on the knowledge of his subordinates. And the superior will ask for the opinion of subordinates. That being the case, the subordinate should make sure he's on firm ground when he makes a recommendation to the superior, because the superior in turn will take action based on your knowledge.
Very good.
Thank you.
Yeah, that sounds very wise to me, Charles. That is a very, very wise management, leadership principle. And that is the leader will inquire from the subordinates, because they're the ones with boots on the ground, so to speak. They're the ones kind of doing it nearest to work. But oftentimes a leader is incompetent. And that's when and they're not going to ask. They're just not going to. But boy, those who are leaders, ask. Listen to what Charles had to say. By the way, we call that servant leadership, don't we, Charles? Servant leadership. When the leader serves the subordinates. That's in the Bible. When I was in the school of business, the 300 years ago that I was speaking of in economics and such, the whole notion of servant leadership was kind of in vogue a bit. In fact, you can find it in academic and scholarly resources. It comes right out of the Bible. You know that. It's where it began, in the Bible. Servant leadership. That's what we try to practice here. It's what we believe. It's how we live. And that is, whoever leads serves. That's what Jesus said. He said, I didn't come to be served. I came to serve. That's Jesus, the Messiah. And so that we should do. All right, let's go to number 3 and to finish this out. Since life is in God's control, why don't you sit back and let God's will unfold? Since life is in God's control, why don't you just sit back, look at the clouds with all the rain in them, look at the tree, don't know which way it's going. Just sit back. Because God's in control. Just sit back and let God's will unfold. What do you think? First of all, you do believe God is in control. Say yes or no. Yes. All right, because the question assumes you believe that God's in control. Okay, we sometimes call that the sovereignty, the lordship of the creator of of the universe. All right, since God's in control, why don't you just sit back and let God's will unfold? By the way, there are some who believe this. You know that. Even today, fewer today, but still, there are still individuals who believe that very thing. What do you think? All right, Terry, we got to let you buy in on this one, huh? Weigh in on this one. Why don't you just sit back He's in control anyway. Just let it unfold.
Years ago, I was discipled by a guy, and I fell into kind of a funk, if you want to call that, because things weren't unfolding the way I wanted them to. And he kept challenging me. He said, God enjoys hitting a moving target,
Okay.
not one sitting still.
Okay.
And he constantly challenged me with that. And what he's basically saying, God is in control, but he unfolds things as you are moving.
Okay.
Of course, he's working, even when I'm sitting still, he's working out things, but until you get up and move, you won't find out what he is unfolding.
All right. All right. Very good. All right. Very good. Very good. Good explanation. All right. Someone else. Someone else. God's in control. Yes, Sandra.
I believe God uses us to bring about his will. And so we know that his will is going to unfold as he ordained it even before the beginning of time, but he allows us to join him in service. And so that's why we don't just sit back. We do what he has called us to do. Every one of us has a purpose and a plan in that will that God has already ordained.
All right. So we're instruments of God's plan. You know, the thing, I don't want to get us off here, but let me just say something here. In theological terms, you know, we could talk about, okay, if God's going to save the world, he doesn't need me. He's going to save him anyway. Or that is a position that has been taken by some. You remember the old primitive Baptist? Anybody know the primitive Baptist? Sometimes they were called the old hard shell Baptist. Yeah, they believe this. I have an uncle that was one, my dad's brother. God's going to, we don't need us because they're elect, and only the elect's going to be saved. Just don't worry about it because they're elect, it's going to happen. There's nowhere in Scripture that says you sit on your hands in life or in service. Here's the thing I was wanting to say about election. Election has to do with salvation, and it has to do with service. By the way, don't separate the two. If you separate the two, you're going to create a gap that should not exist. When you are saved, you serve. There is no such thing, well, I'm saved, I don't get into the service. And neither do we just say, well, I serve, but I'm not really saved. You have to connect being saved by now in the New Testament day through Jesus. So we're saved and we serve. His election basically is not the fact that I need to pick out a whatever color this is. Deborah, what color is this shirt? Green or blue? There's two colorblind people in this worship center, and one asks the other what color his shirt is. Well, that's helpful. All right, Sandra, what color is my shirt? All right, so here's this. So God doesn't say, Randy, wear the green shirt to church today. No, that's not his election. That has nothing to do with election. Election has to do with salvation and service. Don't separate the two, or you'll really create a hole that you'll do nothing but fall in. Okay? Now, having said that, there is never a time when God says, oh, you're saved, so just sit on your hands and don't do anything. No, you're an instrument. Sandra, you're exactly right. We are the instruments of God. We're his body. We're his hands, his feet, as Paul said, 1 Corinthians 12. We do live out that election, that work of God out of the service part. So, yes, he does have a will. He is sovereign. He does save. We don't save. But yet, we're instruments. And so we need to always be about salvation through Christ, but yet serving our Lord through the gospel and the good news of his death, burial, and resurrection. All right, very good. All right, someone else. All right, Sharon White says, he has work for us all to do. We have a role to play. There are things only each of us can do. Sharon, we are unique, aren't we? And Sharon hits that one so clearly. We all have a role to assume, every single one of us. You are a body part. Never discount yourself and say, I'm unimportant. That's what happens there. I'm unimportant. God's going to save him anyway. I don't need me. I don't need to be witnessing. I don't need to be using words. I don't need to be doing good work. I'll just kind of come to church and, and I know he wants me to do that and that's it. No. No, we're missing the whole thing here. No, we're a part of his unfolding plan as instruments of the body. All right, Sister Faith.
Sandra pretty much nailed it, but I mean, she did nail it. But one thing that came to me is that we're in a relationship. I mean, if you take it from that analogy, when you're in a marriage relationship, you don't just sit and stare at each other. If you do, there's, it's going to be pretty empty. So you work at it and you build it and you connect, and there's, so that just came to me about relationship.
Very good. Thank you. Yeah, this is about a relationship, isn't it? Our relationship with God, our work for God, our life on earth is about a relationship with God. Where you work at is about your relationship with God because you are a missionary where you work. Your family is a place not just to procreate and to eat and to share expenses. That is a part of God's will for your life. And so everything we do is a part of this mission calling that God has given us and his unfolding of the plan. All right, very good. All right, Brother Andy, last word, and then we'll wrap up.
I was just thinking about the fact that in the fall of man, God commissioned us to work. So
It's true. Right from the
if it
very
comes from
beginning.
him, that's it.
Right from the very beginning, man was the work, and so it was, even in the garden, and that's just been the will and the way of God. All right, so let's live as wise people, not as fools. Wisdom itself, even what we talked about, you say, well, what we talked about tonight is not going to get me to heaven, and you're sure right about that. It's not what we just studied tonight, not going to get you to heaven. In fact, even what we studied tonight is not going to give you, boy, now I know my purpose in life. Now, boy, I can just live with confidence and significance. And no. But Solomon's been talking about that for weeks and weeks, and he'll end with that, his conclusions. But he kind of hits the pause button and says, wisdom will never get you there, but boy, you're a whole lot better off by being wise than being a fool. So live with wisdom. It is the way God has designed you to live. Heavenly Father, thank you for my brothers and sisters. I love them. More importantly, you love them and you love us, and for that we're grateful. So Lord, without you, Lord, we're hopelessly adrift in this life, in this chasm, this sea of nothingness, meaninglessness. But Lord, with you all things come together. You make meaning. Do incredible things, and we're so grateful to you, our God. Bless my brothers and sisters. Fill them with your spirit. Give them. We're so grateful. Electrical shock we all have had. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. Announcements, if you would just take a peek of your announcement sheet, and God bless.